Mary and I did a two-part study on the trials of Jesus just before Easter, the trials that led up to his crucifixion. The first week was on the Jewish trial and shows a lot of the injustice there, the fact that they ignored the laws. But the second week was the Roman trial. Well, that lesson was supposed to be the payoff for me for months, if not years, of teaching. It ties so many things together. It makes so many other things make sense. And I was just excited. And we had a technological disaster that morning. We were able to sort of shift to a plan B after some delay and do a crippled up Zoom version, but we couldn't record it. And I was really disappointed. A few people asked me if I would re-record it, and I wish Mary could be here. I wish we could do it again, but we can't. So you'll have to put up with me. There's history involved, and I wouldn't subject you to that, except it's just absolutely necessary. It will make so many things make sense. This first map that I'm going to show you is the key to the whole thing. You can see that in around 350 BC, a guy that you've all heard of called Alexander the Great came out of this area up here, if you can see the cursor, Greece, Macedonia, and began to go on a 4-year rampage of conquest. Alexander was a military genius. He may be the best military mind who ever lived. And in battle, he was almost unbeatable. And as you can see on the dark gray area, and I apologize for black and white, but it really is the best map I could find. He swung out of this area in through what we today call Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and even a part of what we call India. If he'd had more time, he would have taken it too. And then down here, he swung down through the Holy Land, we call it the Sinai, and into northern Africa. North Africa is a pretty inhospitable place, except along this Nile Valley. And so you see, he extended his empire deep into North Africa along the Nile Valley. For the record, this one little area here below where it says Phoenicia, that's Israel. And you see what a tiny little spot it is in relation to Alexander's entire empire. So you can't rule this much land by leaving soldiers behind. Nobody's got that many soldiers. You've got to allow people a certain amount of autonomy and have enough soldiers to sort of keep things in line. And so often what empires do, as I said, you leave the people a certain amount of control. And what Alexander did was to assimilate them through Greek culture, Greek philosophy, and the Greek language. And what happens is that the people who, get in line, who join up, are able to become rich. They become wealthy. They trade more. And as it happens, the people who are already wealthy tend to have a much easier time switching teams. Some people say they're traders, but, they get richer and new people get rich. And that's what happens down here in Israel. The aristocracy, the ruling class, and that's centered largely around Jerusalem, very quickly adopt these Greek traits. They began to abandon their Jewish heritage, their the things they're supposed to observe, and they become Greeks, and they get richer, and the other people get poorer. They went so far as to build a Greek gymnasium and all that entails right next to the temple, so that people could look over and watch the games, but also all the other things that go on in a Greek gymnasium. And it was something of an outrage, but because they're the ruling class, nothing changes. Alexander dies unexpectedly at the age of 32. Um, and his empire was already not chopped up, but it was recognized that it came under the rule of 4 of his best generals. The one who was in charge of this area that included Jerusalem, that included Israel, was named Seleucus, and his descendants were known as Seleucids. Seleucus comes in, and, well, he's been in, but he comes to power, and he recognizes that the ruling class in Jerusalem has become Hellenized, which means they've taken on this, Greek culture. And he sees the office of high priest as really being a political function, which by and large it was by that time. Obviously, he wants someone in charge who's not going to cause him any trouble. Now, there was a high priest at the time, and his own brother said, I'd really like to have the job of high priest. And he goes to Seleucus and apparently bribes him. And Seleucus says, yeah, if you're that politically ambitious, you're just the kind of guy I need. You can be high priest. And then someone else comes in and says, well, the job's pretty profitable. I'd like to have it. And he gives Seleucus an even bigger bribe. And Seleucus says, yeah, go ahead. So he kicks out the new high priest and actually has the old original, more or less legitimate high priest killed. He has him murdered. And that should be a clue as to how far the ruling Jewish class have come from their roots, how corrupt they've become. And Seleucus eventually dies, and his descendants take over, and some of them are pretty tolerant of the Jews. And remember, it's easy to be pretty tolerant because they're really buying into the Greek culture stuff. But some of them are openly hostile. The rulers couldn't completely abandon the Jewish customs because the people would have risen up. And besides that, they make a tidy profit off of it. It gives them a kind of power and wealth that they crave. But some of these descendants come in and begin to try and get rid of this pesky Jewish practice. And one of them came in and went so far as to, I should say that the aristocracy had already begun to abandon a lot of the practices personally. But this guy comes in and prohibits them from observing their holidays, their Sabbaths. He bans circumcision. He takes up and burns Torahs. He put a statue of Zeus in the Jewish temple. And then they went so far as, the stories tell us, to sacrificing pigs in the Jewish temple. And the prohibition, the Jews don't eat pork, they're unclean animals. It was an outrage. There was a country priest. The priests from the outlying country would each get a turn. They'd come in and do a year in service in the temple. And he sees one of these pig sacrifices and just loses it. He strikes this guy down, this Seleucid down, and he flees the city and he yells back, any who would be free, anyone who would follow Yahweh, come to me. And his family does, his sons do, other people begin to sort of gravitate to him, and they begin to wage guerrilla war on the Seleucids, and they're very effective. The priest's name was Judah Maccabee, and they begin to talk about the hammer of the Maccabees. They come in, they strike hard, and then they disappear back into the hills. But over time, they begin to really wear them down. They're successful, and the more success they have, the more people come to them. And eventually they liberate Jerusalem and celebrate this great victory. And we could talk more about that. I won't. But the Seleucids are never really kicked all the way out like the stories say. In fact, the Jewish leaders from time to time go to them and say, hey, we got problems with some people up here. They kept a sort of a truce going, but the Seleucids did allow them even more autonomy. But these Maccabees, they've earned the right for one of them to be a king. But he nominates, or not nominates, he names himself high priest. That never, ever, ever should have happened. He's not a descendant of Aaron. He has no claim on the priesthood. But now he's king and high priest, and you see the power that gives. And they set up a hereditary dynasty. They become king and high priest, and they pass this down from generation to generation. And that's not supposed to happen. But some of them, they begin to get full of themselves. You know, we are so successful. We are so good in battle. We need to start going out and conquering some nearby peoples, extract some taxes, some tribute from them. And they do, and they begin capturing people, and they force them to convert to Judaism at sword point. You either convert or die. And as you can imagine, most of them say they convert. One of the groups that they do this to are known as Idumeans, and that really is Edomite. And if you remember way back, Jacob and Esau, Jacob steals the birthright. His brother is this big, brawny, red-headed guy. And the Edomites, a lot of them are red-headed. They're descendants of Esau. Jews did not exist. That was sort of the beginning, but they're cousins, but now they're nominally Jews. And this shows the corruption, the fact that they're no longer really behaving at all like they were told to, like Yahweh's law says. And you flash forward, and the Romans come in, and because the Seleucids, as I said, they're all around through the area, but the Romans come in and they push them out. They basically bring about the end of the Seleucid empire. And the Romans come in and they see immediately that the high priest, this, the temple, the high priest, everything about the religion is also a political office. And there's a high priest in place who passes a capital sentence. He has some people killed. And it causes a problem. Now, Rome values two things: trade and taxes, which is the money, and the other is peace and quiet. What they don't ever want is to have to come in and put down an uprising. They don't want to have to spend money reconquering land that they already spent money conquering. And so law and order, peace and tranquility, that's what they value the most. And so this priest has someone killed, high priest has someone killed, and he gets in trouble, and the Romans make it clear, you're not to pass capital sentences. If you want to do something else, you can do a lot of things. You can still have your laws, and you can still punish people according to your laws. But if you're going to kill them, you're going to come to us first. You're going to get it cleared. And that's important. Pilate, we know about Pontius Pilate, the guy who was in charge of that part of Judea. And what isn't clear to most people is that Pilate is a soldier. Pilate's not a king. Pilate's a soldier, and his job is to stay there and keep things in order, keep anything from getting out of hand, put down any uprisings, and make sure the money keeps flowing. And Pilate normally lives up from Jerusalem in a place known as Caesarea. You would know it as Caesarea. It's named after Caesar. And he had a good thing going there. They got a nice port, get the sea breezes off the Mediterranean. He's got a hippodrome. It's like in the movie Ben-Hur. They have chariot races and horse races. Mary and I actually saw it while we were there. The big stone bleachers that you know, like stadium bleachers. Neat place. But he comes to town during Passover really to keep an eye on things. Because if there's ever a setup for an uprising, it's when you get that many people in one place, you know, sort of a religious fervor. Anything can happen. And so he's there to watch over stuff. The Jewish leaders, their place in this is to keep their people quiet, pacified. As I said, that's what Rome values. And the reason they get to keep being in charge, nominally in charge, is that they're expected to keep things in line. And if they don't, if they fail at that, they'll replace them. They'll get rid of them, put a new high priest in, whatever. They'll find someone who can keep things under control. Somebody's going to figure it out. So it's also important to them not to let anything flare up. And so you get an idea of who the players are and what's important to them. I guess one more thing I should mention is, in exchange for doing this, the Romans allow them to not only stay in power, but they get rich. It's tremendously profitable. When people come in for Passover, they have to make a sacrifice. And they'll bring their own lamb, you know, spotless lamb, and they've set things up where the lambs have to be inspected. And they look them over, you know, a good percentage of them. They go, oh, this one, you know, this one doesn't make the cut. We'll take him and put him over here. But you have to go buy a new one from the lamb vendors. And then when they leave, they take that one back, they wash it up nice, and they sell it to the next poor sap who comes along. Very profitable. Money changing. They have to pay, people coming in have to pay a temple tax. They have to buy sacrifices. They spend money, and they have to do it. They've set it up so that they have to do it in the local coinage. Now, people come from all over the world. The people in the region may come every year, but other people may only come once in a lifetime. But Jerusalem fills up with people, and the leaders, the people in charge, the high priest and, you know, whoever he works under him, they all get a cut of all the money that gets spent in Jerusalem during these festivals. And it's a lot. That's what motivates them. By this time, you may think that these are Jewish rulers, but they're not. They are, in every meaningful sense, Greeks, masquerading as Jewish rulers. You know, I may not be one, but I play one on TV kind of thing. They keep up the pretense, but they don't believe any of it. They're in it for the power and money, clearly, undeniably, and it's understandable given all of this history. It's been like that for a long time. It's been, you know, sort of an evolution. So by the time Jesus comes along, you know how he says that you put stumbling blocks, talking about the law, you put stumbling blocks in front of people and you make it impossible for them. And they do. They use the law. He mentioned that beware of the scribes. They steal widows' land or houses, and it's true. They do. They manipulate things. They have full power, and they get fabulously wealthy. And the people out in the countryside, you know, they may know something's wrong, but they probably don't understand the extent of it. And all this time, when I've been telling you that Jesus preached, talked against the Pharisees and Sadducees and scribes, that he really didn't go after the Romans. He expected this from the Romans. It's the people who had taken the worship of Yahweh, put themselves in charge of it and turned it into a business. It's not me that has a problem with authority, or I just want to say that it's all about the system. This place was utterly corrupt. And that's why you see him do things like turn over the tables of the money changers in the temple courts. So that brings us up. I'm gonna. Last time we had talked about the Jewish trial. I'm gonna read you a little bit from Luke, chapter 23. The Jewish portion of Jesus' ordeal has gone on through the night. The high priest who had been taken out by the Romans for passing capital punishment is Caiaphas. And if you remember, they had taken Jesus first to the house of Caiaphas. He's not really high priest, but he's back there in the wings. But this is going on, and it says, beginning at verse 1, then the whole council rose and led Jesus away to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, we found this man subverting our nation, forbidding payment of taxes to Caesar, and proclaiming himself to be Christ, a king. So a couple of things you need to know here. First of all, you have to remember that the night before they have this sort of, kangaroo court, and they can't get a conviction. They can't get the testimonies to add up, but they finally settle in on a charge of blasphemy. And I'm sure they made that announcement. And once he's in their clutches, I told you this in that week, that once he's in their clutches, they never intend anything other than to kill him. And they pass this sentence of blasphemy, and all of the people who would be supporters will hear that and say, we don't have anything to do with that. That's something that'll could get you killed, certainly could get you exiled. And that was the idea, to isolate him. And then you see they carry him to Pilate. And the charge has changed. They're no longer talking about blasphemy. And I'll get back to why. Under Roman law, you remember the Jews, you were never tried by one judge. It had to be at the minimum of 3, even for small things. On something this big, it had to be the Sanhedrin, and you're talking about 71 people. But under Roman law, things like theft, they don't care. It's your problem. If someone steals from you, it's your job to go out and capture him and drag him back to a magistrate. And then you tell your story, they tell their story, you go back and forth, and it comes down to whoever's most persuasive. For the most part, the more persuasive will be the one who's more wealthy, more prominent, more powerful. Not exclusively, but everyone knows that there's a thumb on the scale of justice. In matters this important, they will go to Pilate to be adjudicated. And Pilate sits by himself, and he does exactly this. He asks questions, and he'll ask the others questions, and, it's whoever tells the best story. It's whoever he wants to believe the most. But his job, never forget, his job is to keep the peace. And so if he finds against someone who's very powerful, who then goes and begins to stir people up, it doesn't keep the peace. And so justice is negotiable. These guys go to, and let me see if I can show you a picture real quick. I think I've got this. This is the path, the dark red that Jesus came into town on. And you see the temple, and you see right up above it, there's 4 little red squares. That's known as the Fortress Antonia. That's the Roman garrison, and that's where Pilate stays when he's in town. And if you look just over to the left, the bottom part of the temple over to the left, you'll see something that says Upper City. That's where all the wealthy people lived, all the important people. And so they carry him up. It's really not that far to Fortress Antonia. And they can't go in because the Passover feast is upon them. And if they go into this Gentile Roman building, they'll be defiled, ritually defiled, and they can't be ritually cleansed for a week. And they can't have that. So Pilate has to come out to them. And that's his job. But you can imagine he's still probably not happy about it. And you can almost hear him thinking and saying, this had better be good. So now what we see is that they get to this gate. This takes place outside, and they begin making their case. And, you know, normally the person being accused would make his. But if you look at what they say, we found him subverting our nation, forbidding payment of taxes to Caesar, and proclaiming himself to be Christ, a king. Remember, what they convicted him of in their little kangaroo court is blasphemy. Rome doesn't care about someone blaspheming the Jewish God. They don't care. If they go to Pilate and say, you know, he blasphemed our God, he's going to say, take a hike. You shouldn't have even troubled me over this. Go away. So they change. And they make this charge, particularly of forbidding payment of taxes to Caesar and being a king, because that's going to be seen, and they're going to represent it as being a threat to Caesar. Pilate has to respond to that. If he refuses to, and they send a messenger to Caesar and say, hey, there was somebody down here threatening your rule, and he did nothing about it, Pilate's going to get called on the carpet at the very least. And if you catch Caesar in a bad mood, it could be a lot worse than that. And Pilate asked him, it says, verse 3, Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And he says, you have said so, which, you know, we've talked about that and what that means. So now I'm going to stop for a minute. You guys know about Herod. Herod the Great, the one that was in charge when Jesus was born. The Romans put him in charge for services rendered. He really helped them out militarily. But because he's a Jew, they think the Jews will follow him. And yet at the same time, they know he's loyal to Rome. And a lot of people ask, why would this guy who's a Jew be so mean to his own people? Why would he abandon his own people that way? Now remember the story I told you about the Maccabees and how they went out and conquered these other people, including the Edomites. Herod was an Idumean, an Edomite. His people had been forced to convert at sword point. So while he's nominally a Jew, he's really not, and he hates them. This is the Edomites' revenge, you know? And so he was never nice, and his descendants, same thing. They're not really Jews. They are, but they aren't. It's the same thing you see in the ruling class here in Jerusalem. They're Jews, but they're really not. So they make this charge, and Pilate asks him, are you a king? And he gives that response. And Pilate says, you know, I don't see any reason to bring charges against this man. Always remember, Pilate's there to keep things quiet and keep peace. So he'd rather just have this go away. But they kept insisting, and this is the way things are done in Roman trials. That one makes a case, another makes it, and they just, until someone prevails, someone convinces them. But they kept insisting. He stirs the people up all over Judea with his teaching. See, the threat to Rome, the threat to Caesar. He began in Galilee and has come all the way here. Now remember back many weeks ago where I told you that when it was time, Jesus leaves the Galilee And all the way down, he does everything he can to insult and anger the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. Right. Even they say so. And so, they say he began in Galilee, and Pilate heard this and asked if the man was a Galilean. And learning that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself was in Jerusalem at the time. So, Herod lives up by the Sea of Galilee. Herod the Great, the father's kingdom, got sort of split into four when he died. And this son got 1/4 of it, and he's up around the Sea of Galilee. And he comes to Jerusalem because, frankly, it's exciting. Things are, you know, there's not enough excitement, and so they come in for the festivals. And Pilate sees a great way out of this. Oh, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, he's not mine. Now, what you don't know from this is that a couple of times in the recent past, Pilate has stepped on Herod's jurisdiction. Even though Herod has more or less full control, sovereignty in his area, Pilate's still a Roman. And he stepped on Herod's jurisdiction, and Herod hates him for it. And yet, when it comes to this, he says, he's a Galilean. And I know Herod's in town. Send him over there. In verse 8, when Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased. And that in the original means exactly that. He was excited. He's overjoyed. He had wanted to see him for a long time because he had heard about him, was hoping to see him perform a miracle. So keep in mind, these rulers at that time, they have all this money, but they get bored. And Herod has heard about these miracles going on in the area that, you know, he's in charge of. And he says, well, I want to see one of those. And he'd been looking for Jesus, and he finally comes, and he's excited. It's good. Show me some magic. You know, Jesus doesn't respond to him. And Herod, it says that he gave no answer. Verse 10, meanwhile, the chief priests and scribes stood there, vehemently accusing him. So the whole time, they're keeping up their tirade. They have every intention of seeing to it that he dies. You notice the Jewish leaders, even though Herod is supposedly a Jew, he's not a part of that. They are, but they're there. They're following him around. This is a grudge match. And even Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him, dressing him in a fine robe. They sent him back to Pilate. Herod's bored and a little bit angry because he didn't get the excitement he was looking for. And they join in with the mockery. And verse 12 is interesting. Herod sends him back to Pilate, and it says, that day Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this time, they had been enemies. And there's the reason that we believe that that's reliable is because we're told that there were believers inside the court. One of Herod's chief advisors' wife was a believer and a follower. And so this information was probably readily available. A lot gets made of that, but it's perfectly understandable. But he sends him back to Pilate and mocking him, and from that day on, they were friends. This is politicians. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes may be at each other's throats, and they are, in every sense of the word, a political party. They are political parties with platforms and the whole thing. They're not religious institutions. And they may fight amongst themselves, but then they'll join up on something like this. They'll go in league with each other, and you see the same thing on this royalty side. That this sort of brings Herod and Pilate together. They'd been enemies, and now they're not. Verse 13, then Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people. And he said to them, you brought me this man as one who is inciting the people to rebellion. I've examined him here in your presence and found him not guilty of your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he's done nothing deserving death. Therefore, I will punish him and release him." But they all cried out in unison, "Away with this man!" In the other Gospels, we see a couple of things I'm gonna digress here and mention. While he's talking to Pilate, sort of privately being questioned, he asks Jesus if he's a king, and he gives that sort of cryptic response. And then I asked him another time, and he said, "My kingdom is not of this world. And if it was, my people would be rebelling against you. They'd bring swords." And Pilate hears that and thinks, "Your kingdom is not of this world? Oh, you're really no threat to me then, are you? You're one of those people. Have at it. You know, I don't care what you do in another world." And there's a point also where Jesus tells him, "Everyone who values the truth listens to me." And Pilate's response is classic. It's something I wind up thinking about at least 2 or 3 times a year when I see how some certain people behave. Jesus says, "Anyone who values the truth listens to me." And Pilate says, "What is truth? What do I care about that?" All right, there are people, and actually kind of a lot of people, who believe truth is for chumps. And the people who believe in the truth are chumps, and I can use it against them. Truth is what I say it is. And the people who value the truth, when I proclaim what the truth is, they've got to follow it. They got to follow what I say. I mean, it's a trap. And Pilate's one of those. He's a consummate politician. What is truth? I hear a version of that often enough when I'm dealing with politician type people. What does it matter whether it's true or not if it works? And so what Pilate says is, "I'm just going to punish him." Now, this flogging, this punishment, is not something you'd want to go through. It's pretty severe. And he doesn't mind that. You see that they have this custom where at Passover, they release a prisoner, usually a political prisoner, but they release a prisoner. And you think, well, why would they have a rule like that? Why would they do it? It's because if you can be seen as magnanimous, the people are going to be less likely to rise up against you. You know, throw them a bone and they won't bark at you so much. And so during this festive time, they have this custom. And it's just one more way of sort of keeping the people pacified. And he says, I've got this custom. How about if I give you a choice? You can either have Barabbas. Now, I think normally they have a bigger choice, but he narrows it to 2. You can either have Barabbas, or you can have this guy from Galilee. Now, what Pilate knows is that Barabbas is a murderer, but he's also a revolutionary. He has led an insurrection and got caught, as they do. And if he gets out and does it again, the Jewish leaders know it's on them. And remember, they're there to keep the people pacified and keep them out of Rome's hair. So what Pilate thinks is, I'll offer them this choice, and they won't have any choice. They're not going to choose Barabbas because it's a threat to them if he gets out and stirs up more trouble. And they fooled him. They said, just like when they first brought him in, they basically said, no. We brought him to you because we don't have the authority to kill him for capital punishment, and we are gonna kill him. So we want you to do it. And that's the same thing they say: crucify him. We've heard that. the idea that it was the same people who had been putting palm fronds down, probably not as much as you'd think. I showed you that picture a while ago of the upper city. These people were probably mostly from the upper city. And the people who brought palm fronds were the threat. That's who they feared. And they've already subdued them with that charge of blasphemy. These people are on a vendetta. They've come out and they're going to stay with this until they secure a death penalty ruling. And they said in verse 18, they all cried out in unison, "Away with this man, release Barabbas to us." Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate addressed them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." Now, they don't just want him killed. There are several methods for capital punishment that are acceptable in the Roman Empire. One of them is strangling, one is beheading. Not just crucifixion. They don't just want Jesus killed. Crucifixion is a horrible way to die, extremely cruel. But the real purpose behind it is a deterrent. They hang these people out in plain sight, and it takes them days to die. And anyone who might be a supporter or might in the future think about challenging Rome, they're going to think twice, maybe 3 times after having seen this. And that's what they want. They want him put out there as an example, and they want to totally just dismantle any following that he had. They want him crucified. And that's what they're screaming for. No, 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 crucify him. They were insistent, demanding with loud voices for Jesus to be crucified, and their clamor prevailed. So Pilate sentenced that their demand be met. As they had requested, he released the one in prison for insurrection and murder and handed Jesus over to their will. Now, again, in the other Gospels, we've already been told it says not wanting to kill Jesus. He offers this other deal. And we're told in the other Gospels that he washes his hands of it. Don't think for a minute that Pilate cares about this guy from Galilee, that he cares about doing the right thing. I guess first of all, what you should know, I've told you about what happens to anyone who passes capital punishment and stirs things up. If you flog somebody, his followers might not like it, but they're not going to have a revolt over it. But if you kill the wrong guy, you might stir people up and you might cause an uprising. And Pilate is cagey. He's been around for 10 years, and most of them, the people like him, hang around for an average of about 3 from what we understand. He's smart. He plays the game well. He doesn't care anything about whether or not Jesus gets killed. He looks at this situation and says, well, this could be explosive. This could be a problem. So he's looking for a way out. And when he washes his hands, it's not out of wanting to do the right thing. What he wants is to be sure that if there's any blowback, it's not on him. He's made it clear, this is on you guys. What you also don't know from this is that it's only a couple years later. Pilate has some Samaritans killed. I don't really understand. They were looking for some religious artifacts, but they crossed with him. And you always think that Romans just hand out death sentences at the drop of a hat. They've got total control and they just kill people all the time. They've got to be smart about it. And Pilate had these people killed, and it caused a problem, and they summoned him back to Rome. He was in deep trouble. As it happens, the emperor died while he was on the ship, and there are some conflicting stories about what happened to him, but there was a chance. There had been a couple of other guys like him that had killed some people and it caused a problem, and they got called back to Rome, and I think they got killed too. And then they sent word out, don't let this happen. You can't just go killing people just because. Not because we care about them, they're not Romans, but we don't want to have to spend money sending soldiers in to retake land we already spent money taking once. So Pilate does. He washes his hands. He hands them over to the Jews for them to. Now he sends a centurion, and we don't know, but the soldiers that take him are probably temple soldiers, most of them. He hands them over to the Jews to do what they want. He effectively gives the permission that they lack to carry out a death sentence. So this is the end of what passes for trials. The Jewish trials were not conducted according to Jewish law at all, and that's because the people conducting them are not really Jews anymore. The Roman trial is not about justice, right or wrong. Most of the time, it's about power and control, being sure that nothing causes a problem for the Roman Empire. And what you see is that politicians look out for their power and control. It's just like that today. I'm currently dealing with it, and I look at people and I sometimes just, I shake my head. The lengths that they'll go to maintain power, up to and including turning on me for things. It doesn't matter if there are facts. If we say it, we determine what the truth is. We determine the facts. And what I don't want is to give anyone the impression that what I've said is that Jesus' mission was political, that he was there to strike down a corrupt political system. It was corrupt, all right, but you'll notice he didn't strike it down. If that's what he was doing, then you'd have to conclude that he failed because he just lacked the power to do anything about it. I've told you for weeks to keep in mind that they didn't take him against his will. They didn't kill him against his will. It was a sacrifice. They were the necessary tools. It was time. And certainly he used them. He used their corruption and their lust for power. But they did exactly what he needed them to do. He came for redemption. There's a place where he says that he's the good shepherd, and he mentions, I have sheep who are not of this flock. And that's us, the Gentiles. We're not of the Jewish flock. And so he came for this redemption. And there are and always will be people who would rather have power than forgiveness. If there's no such thing as right and wrong, if there's no need for forgiveness, for redemption, then why wouldn't I just reach out and take whatever I want, so long as I have the power to do it? And so the key is amassing power. I get what I want. He did, I don't want to say fight with, but he dealt with those people who clung to power, who had that lust for power. But it wasn't about the power, and it wasn't about the control. It was about the sacrifice. And now that you understand that, as you go back through, which I hope sometimes you do, and you begin to look at the New Testament, you begin to look at his lessons, you see two things. You see that he came to free us from this corrupt sort of behavior. But he didn't come to free us in the sense that we no longer have to deal with it. We no longer have to be a part of it. He freed us from being like them. We're forgiven and we're given a new life. We're given a new nature. And he made it clear that these things can't really touch the part of us that's important. The behavior of that class of people never slowed down. It never stopped. And it won't until what we're told happens in the end times. And yet we're given the comfort and the ability to live within it with hope, with joy, and with the knowledge that the power here is not the final word on things. He used them to make absolutely certain that the sacrifice was given. I hope next Easter you'll remember all that.